Hello everyone. This is our presentation on the Native Women's Association. So what is the Native Women's Association? The Native Women's Association is a non-profit organization that provides services and support for Indigenous women, girls, and even their families. According to recent studies, Indigenous women experience violence in any situation more often than non-Indigenous women. This is due to many systematic issues such as poverty, racism, discrimination, and even sexism. These issues are complex and stem back from a long time ago, which is why they are still somewhat existing in society today. So this is a picture of Leanne Gerwachs. She is the CEO at the Native Women's Association of Canada, the largest Indigenous women's association in the country. The mission statement of the Native Women's Association of Canada advocate and inspire families and many Indigenous nations. They work to be the national voice for Indigenous women, girls, and gender-diverse people, to address issues in a manner that reflect changing needs of Indigenous women, girls, and gender-diverse people in Canada. So you might think, what is the importance of the National Native Women's Association? So they're crucial in addressing violence, the root cause of this violence, and providing support to the women that have experienced this violence. They offer a range of programs and services aimed to provide support for all Indigenous women and girls who have experienced violence in many different ways, including family violence and crime. The programs include crisis intervention, counseling, and even community education. They also work towards raising awareness about the issues of missing and murdered children and women, and the other legislative changes to address any root cause of violence against Indigenous women. So what is the impact of the NWAC? They aim to provide many services and support to all individuals experiencing any sort of violence, including LGBTQ+ individuals. They also work towards addressing the unique situations each individual faces and aim to overcome them. In my opinion, based on their goals and recent studies, I believe that the NWAC is extremely important and impactful to today's society, based on the services they provide. They address some of the glorified issues Indigenous women are facing with and attempt to make them better. They also include their services to anyone and everyone, showing their inclusiveness and willingness to help you no matter who you are. They are, in fact, a major step in the solution of trying to bring the Indigenous people to equality.
After doing the impact of NWAC, here it comes definitions. The first point is about the gender-based violence, and it is committed against a person based on their gender identity, gender expression, or perceived gender, and entails the abuse of power and control over that individual. Intimate partner violence. This refers to any type of abuse by a current or former intimate partner, including physical assault, sexual assault, stalking, threats of physical or sexual assault, and emotional or psychological abuse. When someone is homeless, it might mean those who are now homeless and have been thus for 6 months or longer in the previous year are considered chronically homeless. In the next slide, we are talking about the Indigenous women and violence and their rates of violence. In comparison to other women in province, First Nations women in Ontario face domestic abuse, assault, homicide, and sexual exploitation at much higher rates. 3 times as many Native women and girls as non-Native women report having been victims of violent crime. This higher prevalence of victimization was observed in an intimate relationship and acquaintance violence. In Canada, Ontario is one of the main centers for sex trafficking. Vulnerable individuals worldwide are affected by this kind of sexual exploitation. Young women, many of whom are Indigenous women and girls, are those most at risk. In the upcoming slide, we are talking about the root causes of violence. Racism and inequality are perpetuated by ingrained colonial notions. These conditions are exacerbated by sexism and misogyny that fuel violence against women in Ontario. More than just attitudes defying colonialism, it leads to rules, regulations, and policies that will exist in various forms both today and in the future. Traditional communities were forced to adopt patriarchal values by the colonialism. Respected women in their equal status with men are upended by these viewpoints. The residential school systems at cities were one attempt at integration in Ontario. These schools were in the operation for almost 150 years. Youth were cut off from their culture, morals, families, and communities by the system. Families and communities are still being impacted by residual effects today. The violence facts are young women under 18 make up 75% of survivors of sexual assault in indigenous communities. Compared to non-indigenous women are around 3.5 more likely to experience domestic abuse. Only 1.2% of Ontario's population is indigenous, while 6% of female homicide victims are indigenous women. In Ontario, moms made up 88% of missing and murdered indigenous women. Compared to non-Indian women, indigenous women and girls are more likely to be slain by a stranger, nearly 17% of those prosecuted by strangers. Thank you.